Hi.
Nice to talk to you.
Lovely to talk to you too. It's an interesting topic.
It is. What did you make of the recent developments in the Northern Territory?
Look, we actually commend the Northern Territory Government for implementing this legislation. It's a form of community notification that we have been supporting and, I guess, advocating for a number of years. There has been calls for the Megan's Law approach, particularly from commentators like Darren Hinch. However, we've been really concerned about that type of approach in the US because we've seen in the research that when you name an offender and put in their address, and in some states they actually put a sign outside the house saying, the sex offender lives here, there are some really serious unintended consequences where these offenders go missing, they don't register. So there are some real concerns about that type of community notification. However, we think that some of those concerns may actually be addressed in the Northern Territory approach, and so, it would be really interesting to see how it unfolds.
Now, as we know, Bravehearts advocates the first response should always be the continued detention of dangerous sex offenders, and their position, or your position there, is that dangerous sex offenders should not be released back into the community, well, until such time as they're assessed as low risk and that risk can be managed throughout the community. There has been a bit of a lack of will by the courts to continually detain offenders, and it's meant that a limited register will at least give the community a fighting chance. Now, what would be the Bravehearts' preferred scheme?
Yeah, look, I think, we'd like to see this sort of three-tiered approach. We would like to see that, all sex offenders, when they are released, are sort of kept on a register that the police and child protection authorities can access so they know where they are. However, we do think that there is another way that we need to deal with these dangerous sex offenders. There is a percentage of these offenders who are dangerous repeat offenders and who will pose an ongoing risk to the community. So, a number of states, including the Queensland and including Northern Territory, have introduced legislation that allows for the government to go to the courts and ask for the continued detention of these offenders post their release date. And we 100% support that, but we are seeing the courts releasing these offenders on intensive supervision orders instead of continually detaining them. And we would just like to sort of see, I guess, that legislation tightened up.
Okay, I can't let you go this afternoon, Carol, without referring to a story that I saw today in the press. Best-selling novelist John Grisham says child porn shouldn't always mean jail. He writes that far too many men are being jailed for viewing child pornography, and he says that, look, the problem is that a lot of guys my age, now he's 59, were being locked up when they had really done no more than had too much to drink and visited an illegal website. My reading into this is that maybe John himself might have had a little bit too much to drink while he was writing this.
I like your take on it. Look, I think that, for me, when I read those comments and I listened to the interview where he stated these strange commentary, is that the most concerning thing is that, Grisham is showing a real lack of insight into the impacts of child exploitation material on victims. Not only do victims have to go through the trauma of the original abuse, but they've got to live with the knowledge that their images are online and being viewed by people. And, certainly, we've had researchers who've been speaking to some of these victims, and they've sort of said that some of the biggest fears is they walk down the street and someone's looking at them, and they don't know whether they're looking at them because they know them or because they've seen them on one of these websites.
Yeah.
So it's, I think that Grisham has shown a real lack of insight there. And look, while we do agree that not all offenders are the same or should be treated the same, there needs to be consequences for these offending behaviours.
Yeah, look, we know that John Grisham has written some great books. The Firm and A Time to Kill. He sold 275 million books and over a 25-year career. A lot of people would pay attention to what he's saying. Now, he cited the case of, quote, a good buddy from law school who was caught in a Canadian child pornography sting a decade ago as an example of the excessive sentencing. He says his drinking was out of control and he went to a website. It was labelled 16-year-old wannabe hookers or something like that. and it said 16-year-old girls. So he went there, downloaded some stuff. It was 16-year-old girls who looked 30. Now, he writes he shouldn't have done it. It was stupid, but it wasn't 10-year-old boys. He didn't touch anything. And God, a week later, there was a knock at the door. The FBI were there. It was a sting set up, and the next thing you know, he went to prison for 3 years. My take on that is, so he damn well should have.
Exactly. Look, the age of consent, in the States varies. Here, here we do have the age of consent of 16. In the United States, it varies, and it's very likely that in that state, 16 was under the age of consent. Regardless, if he'd been drinking, whatever the excuse is, he accessed a site for underage young girls, and that is just as serious as accessing sites that have 10-year-old boys on it. There's absolutely no difference.
Would you argue, or perhaps would you agree in some extent with this argument of Grisham's, that current sentencing, and obviously he's referring mostly to the US, but current sentencing policies fail to draw a distinction between real-world abusers and those who download content accidentally or otherwise?
Yeah, look. The US definitely does have more severe sentencing penalties than we do have here in Australia. But look, I think that what needs to be remembered is that behind every one of those images that people are downloading, if someone accesses a site, stumbles across it, searching for something else and comes across it and views it, that's one thing. But someone who purposefully searches out these sites, downloads the images, saves them to their computer to look at again and again and again, that is serious behaviour, and that's a crime. And it's not a victimless crime.
There was an article written in a libertarian magazine called Reason, quite provocative. It says, looking v touching. It argued that something was seriously wrong with a justice system in which people who look at images of child rape can be punished more severely than people who actually rape children. It's it's one of those things. Just stay away from it.
Exactly.
Really, whether you're viewing down, there is a distinction, I would imagine, between clicking on something accidentally, but then click off it, but don't download it.
That's exactly right. That's exactly right. And look, there is definitely, a difference between someone who physically harms a child and someone who is looking at child pornography. But again, looking at child pornography is just as serious an offence because, again, every image of a child there is just being abused. And by downloading those images, by viewing those images, you're actually fueling that industry that, that exploits children.
Absolutely. All right, good to talk to you. Thanks for your time this afternoon.
Absolute pleasure, thank you.
Thank you. Bravehearts criminologist Carol Ronkin there on Canberra Live.